Hello there, welcome to the optional extra video for the Lexus LS, and if you got to this video before the main video, then I'll put a link to the main video up there so that you can access it. So there was a lot of very good sources for information about the Lexus LS and certainly the development of the first version, which I found online. But one video I found which I thought would be interesting, you might want to check out, is a video by a YouTube channel called Barchetta. I think that's it, that's the name of it, presumably named after the Fiat Barchetta. The YouTube channel is called Barchetta, and the video they made was called Celsior, and it's a 1 hour documentary going in very much into detail just about the development of the first version Lexus LS, and it sort of finishes around 1989, 1990, but it goes into way more detail, and certainly the information that I found online corroborates with what they said, so it seemed to be pretty accurate. So going to the first version of the Lexus LS, when they're developing it, Toyota are completely obsessed with quality. The panel gaps they do on the car are not just better than any that they've ever done before, Toyota have ever done before, but they're better than anyone has ever done before, so any other car. The bonnet and the boot panel gaps were actually designed not to be parallel. They were designed so that when you viewed the car from the front or the back, that with perspective it made them look parallel. The engine revs with the automatic gearbox retarded on every upshift to remove the lurch that you got on an automatic gearbox when you changed up. It had air suspension, which I think there was air suspension on the Range Rover at the time, but I think this was the first time anyone had ever thought to put air suspension on a luxury saloon. When it came to the choice of Lexus dealerships, Toyota were very demanding. In the 1960s, of course, it was the complete opposite. Toyota had to beg people almost to become dealers. But by the 1980s, if you were a Lexus dealer, you had to put millions of dollars down to build a showroom in the way that Toyota wanted you to build it. You had to go through a series of hurdles to ensure that you were the right sort of business that were up to the task of selling Lexus cars. And even then, Toyota turned away many different candidates. Another thing I didn't talk about in the video just because it was so long and I had to cut something was in 1987 Toyota came out with the FXV2 concept car, FXV standing for Future Experimental Vehicle. It's not what was outside of this concept car that was interesting, but it was what was underneath. Both the electronically controlled air suspension and the V8 engine were from the new Lexus car that would be released in 2 years' time. And of course, that wasn't really picked up at the time, but it was interesting that Lexus or Toyota was signaling the future intent of what they were going to do through this concept car. So then the Lexus LS 400 is released in 1989, and this car didn't just put luxury makers under a lot of pressure, Cadillac and Lincoln and BMW and Mercedes, but with the better panel gaps, the better quality components that went into all Toyota cars, it meant that now all Toyota cars became incredibly good. So for example, the 1992 Toyota Camry had triple ceiling frame doors, which was the first time any car in this class had got something like this. And this all came from the Lexus development, all the money that they poured into making a quality car in the 1980s. So this meant not just luxury car makers, but mass market car makers had to step up their game as well. So cars like the Chevy Cavalier and cars like this suddenly had to become so much better to try and compete with cars like the Toyota Camry. So I talk a lot about the protectionist policies which the US put in place to stop Japanese cars getting imported. There's that limit of 1.68 million cars that I talk about, and then the Clinton administration in the mid-90s decide to double the price of tariffs on 13 different cars, that luxury Japanese cars that come in, and their reasoning is that Japan is restricting import of American cars. I'm not sure if that's true or not, I don't know all the details behind that, but that all gets resolved. But the protectionist policies of the US pale into insignificance compared to countries like France and Italy, who were very draconian about importing any Japanese cars. And I saw an article from around the time in France in the early 1990s talking about the fact that they were going to put these severe restrictions on Japanese cars, or continue to do them, because they wanted to protect Renault so that Renault had time to restructure, which is quite interesting, seeing though just a few years later they end up buying Nissan. But anyway, the France and Italy managed to limit Japanese imports in the 1990s to just 3% of sales. So one thing I don't think I explained too well is why the Lexus brand didn't come to Japan. Now, in the early days, I think Toyota just had the idea that they were just going to continue with the Toyota brand. But as the Lexus brand becomes more popular around the world and it gains more international brand recognition, there's obviously an interest for Japan to actually bring the Lexus brand to their home country. But by the early 1990s, the economy stagnates. It goes into maybe a mild recession, but it never really gets going. There's a property bubble that sort of collapses things. And that's what's known as the lost decade, from about 1992 to about sort of 2002. And it's continued as well. I mean, even after 2002, the economy hasn't really got going. It's sort of gone in fits and starts. But by 2003, Toyota felt that the Lexus was now a sufficiently successful brand around the world and the Japanese economy was recovering that they could bring it to Japan. And also by this point, Toyota had split out the Lexus business into a completely separate business unit, and so it was now sort of autonomously doing its own thing. So again, it made sense to have Lexus cars in Japan. So I talk at the end of the video that the Lexus LS today is less in real terms than the first generation LS, but of course BMW and Mercedes cars are vastly cheaper than they were before. So maybe, of course, Lexus was right in 1990 that the BMW and Mercedes cars were simply overpriced, but in reality, BMW and Mercedes have learnt the mass production tips from Japanese automakers in the intervening period. And of course, they've also increased the amount of cars they produce, and this allows them to make cheaper cars because they've got economies of scale, so they can go to part suppliers and negotiate cheaper prices because they're ordering more of those parts. But of course, by tearing the Lexus LS apart in the early 1990s to find out how they made their cars so well, the BMW and Mercedes and of course Audi have learnt exactly how to make a car that's a higher quality for a cheaper price. So I show again at the end of the video that Cadillac are struggling in the US, but one thing I didn't point out in the video because it's maybe not relevant, but they're selling better than ever in China. The Chinese sales are phenomenal. Now, the problem is that with the figures I show, I mainly focus on US figures, and that's because it's a bit spotty about what production figures data or sales data I can get for Lexus cars and also their competitors. There's no worldwide data, for example, so I can't just look at worldwide figures. And in fact, the European and China data is also fairly spotty. For example, I can't get any Chinese data for Lexus sales, which would be very useful to have, as apparently they've done quite well, but it would be useful to put that in. So finally, I have a couple of bloopers. The first one is when I have problems trying to say the word lure, and the second one is to do with this big car license plate, which is actually held on with blue tack. And if you've noticed at the start of the video, the big car plate was sort of slightly crooked and then it got straightened. Anyway, so this is why. Toyota's strategy was to lure. Toyota's strategy was to attract younger buyers who couldn't afford its German rivals, were now older and more affluent. Honda was... Oh God. Well, thanks for watching the optional extra video, thanks for watching the main video, and I'll see you in the next video.